Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Field Goals Podcast. I am Dan Viens, and it's Mock Draft Monday, our post-Super Bowl Mock Draft Monday. A little different perspective on how things are, or how we want them to be after watching the Eagles and the Chiefs go at it yesterday, and the Chiefs winning their second Super Bowl in the Patrick Mahomes era, as his career just continues to head towards really rarefied air. At the age of just 27 years old, his second Super Bowl. Tom Brady had 3 by this age, but Mahomes is really on to something over there in Kansas City. But we saw some similarities in those two teams and what got them there. And as Seahawk fans, we made the playoffs out in the first round. We know we've got the draft picks. We know we've got a little bit of cap flexibility. There are things that we see that we like, right? We're window shopping right now. We're watching the Senior Bowl. We're watching all of the All-Star games. We're watching the playoffs and the Super Bowl. We see things that we want. And how do you get those? You start by signing some free agents potentially, and you draft. And that's what we do on Mock Draft Mondays here, as long as Field Goals continues to exist anyway, at least through the end of this month. By the way, little programming note, late next week, because I'm leaving on the 26th for a little spring training adventure in Arizona. So late next week, Dana, Brandon Schultz, former host of this show, now host of the Seahawks podcast. We're going to be getting together one last time to kind of wrap some things up as we head into this offseason and say goodbye to the Field Goals podcast. And with that being said, stick around for the end of the show tonight. I will have an announcement about the future of this feed and what I'm personally going to be doing as far as my next venture. But tonight, it's all about the draft. And we're going to do it a little different way tonight. First of all, let me bring in my good friend Michael Thompson from 12th Man Rising to join me here. He has been on the show before. We have done a mock draft before, but we did it together. We're going to do a little differently this time. First of all, Michael, how are you? And right off the top, just give me some quick thoughts on this Monday after the Super Bowl about what you saw yesterday, and particularly as you're thinking about how you want to approach this offseason as someone who's into the team building aspect of things. If you're the Seahawks and you're seeing what happened in these playoffs, what is it telling you?
Yeah. Hey, Dan. Hope all is well with you, man. Happy Monday after the Super Bowl. Well, first off, I think it was very clear. I know there's a little bit of drama from like the Buffalo Cincinnati incident with DeMar Hamlin and whether Buffalo should have been the 1 seed and everything. I think that was very clearly the 2 best teams in football. Without question, the offensive lines yesterday were fantastic. Like that was a perfect example of what happens when you have a top 3, top 5 offensive line. You can shut down a dominant pass rush. The Philadelphia Eagles were like the 85 Bears at times this season in terms of getting to the quarterback. They didn't sack Mahomes one time. And if you give a great player time, even though I think everyone watching that game could understand Philly's a better team, but maybe a little bit of the coaching, the experience, and then just Mahomes' greatness. Not that Jalen Hurts didn't show greatness. It just was a little bit more creativity in getting guys open, whereas the Philly just looked more like it was almost like a basketball team that's super talented going against a well-oiled machine that's played together for so long. And it was like just sheer talent overcome great X's and O's and scheming guys open. And that was a very weird, like an interesting like battle. But the clearest thing for me again was the front line, the offensive line, a powerful center, a powerful interior offensive line, bookend tackles that can get the job done and give you time to get your talented guys like AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, even a little bit older veterans that used to be great, like Juju Smith-Schuster, Travis Kelce. You give these guys time, you can do damage. And we just saw one of the highest scoring Super Bowls of all time, one of the great Super Bowls of all time. I'm too tired to talk about the flag. I think everyone wants to talk about it and stuff, and that'll probably get talked about for a few more days. I think Bradbury kind of cleared that up for everyone, admitting that he held, but it brought to my mind the desperate need to go and finish the offensive line. We got the bookend tackles. We need to finish that probably with 1, if not 2 interior players, whether that's in free agency or the draft, as well as going out and getting, in my opinion, I would call it a blue chip pass rusher, and then probably some unmovable force in the middle as a defensive tackle that's not almost 40 years old, and has a chance to be great. And personally, I'm a big fan of this draft. I think that there is multiple guys on all of those positions that you can get, whether it's at pick 5, 20, or even possibly going into the 4th and even maybe the 5th round.
Yeah. It's interesting you talk about the offensive lines, because so much of the focus this offseason so far for Seahawk fans has been we gotta build that defensive front, and that's true. And Pete Carroll talked specifically about that. But Philadelphia Eagles really neutralized that Kansas City defensive line. We didn't hear a whole lot from Frank Clark. We didn't hear much at all from Chris Jones, and they've made investments up there in both draft capital and free agency, and then paying to retain their own guys too. And then you flip it over and you think about a couple years ago, and Kansas City, Mahomes might have 3 Super Bowls if it weren't for that abysmal performance from his offensive line a couple years ago. Granted, there were some injuries at the time. They completely flipped that whole thing and rebuilt it. And they did it with some shrewd free agent signings, but also through the draft, Creed Humphrey and Trey Hill. And it just goes to show you, as much as some people like to say, well, you don't want to lean too heavily on rookies, you can do it quickly.
Yeah, I think the Super Bowl, like I said, the biggest thing that struck my mind is just what a dominant offensive line can do in obviously a very slippery field, led to a lot of wide open guys, but just that was the biggest thing for me. The second biggest thing, and I think this is something that's important for Seahawk fans that are divided on the Geno Smith camp or what path we go next with our picks, is there's 2 different paths that you can go to being a great 15, 14 win team in the Super Bowl. You can have a franchise quarterback that you're paying $50 million a year, as long as you chip away in the draft. And I wrote about this the day before the Super Bowl on 12th Man Rising, some of the lessons that Seahawk fans can learn from these teams, the trenches, but also if you just chip away at the draft. The Chiefs drafted Tyreek Hill, Chris Jones, and Mahomes in back-to-back drafts. And that was, I believe, about 5 years ago. And each year they have drafted a minimum of 2 to 3 starters every year, just not even superstars, just chipping away, keep adding a few good players. And then this year, you want to talk about the only draft that can even threaten Seattle's draft? It's the Chiefs draft. I believe they had 7 guys that they drafted that played meaningful minutes in the Super Bowl and were starters. And none of those guys were necessarily superstars. Like Karlaftis wasn't a superstar, but he was a good player. And that's what Seattle needs. They need good players. Then you look at Philadelphia. They took advantage of nailing Jalen Hurts in the second round, where you had a 3-year window before you got to pay him $50 million, where you could go and be, and they had good drafts as well, but they were aggressive. They took what they had, the Carson Wentz trade, and they were able to eventually parlay those things into getting AJ Brown for just 1 first-round pick. And AJ Brown was a top 5 receiver this year. You're able to trade back and still get Devontae Smith, who's one of the greatest receivers to ever, play college football. It allowed them to go out, aggressive ownership and leadership. Go get Ndamukong Suh. Go get Linval Joseph. Go get Robert Quinn. Like, they reminded me a lot of the 12-13 Seahawks, where let's go get Michael Bennett. Let's go get Cliff Averill. Let's go get Percy Harvin. Even if it doesn't work out, let's go get these guys and let's just try and overwhelm with talent. And so if you're a Seahawk fan, you're watching that game, I think it's very clear there's work to be done, but there's 2 paths that you can go, whether you keep Geno and move forward with him and whatever that contract looks, or whether you move forward and kind of do a 1-year step back, but really load up on a youthful team.
Yeah, and that's a subject for a whole nother show, and one that I plan to do. And I think the Super Bowl really kind of points that out. Is people tend to, they have blinders on, and they tend to narrow their focus so much that they only look at it one way. And this whole, you see a lot of this in the message boards. You see a lot of it in the Seahawk Facebook groups that I belong to, and even on the field goals and some of the comment section there. It's either one extreme or the other. It's either you get a franchise guy, a top 5 guy, and you pay him whatever because those guys don't grow on trees, or you go with a rookie quarterback or a rookie contract. There is a middle ground. It's all about allocation of funds. You look at the Chiefs, and the way they're able to do it is because they're paying some big money to a couple of guys on the defensive line, a couple of guys in the secondary, but they're not paying a lot of money up front on the offensive line because they've drafted well there. Yep. You look at the Seahawks distribution of funds. Yeah, we can talk about how much they're paying their safeties, but they're not outside of Nwosu at $10 million a year. They're not paying any of their edge guys, and they're young there. They're not really paying any of their defensive line guys, and they're probably going to draft to fill those holes. They've got their 2 offensive tackles they got in last year's draft, so that's a window of 4 years before they have to pay those guys. It just funds are going to be available, and we're not talking about Geno getting a $50 million a year contract. We're not talking about him having 20% of the salary cap like Mahomes does right now.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so, there's definitely opportunities, and the way that you attack that is through the draft. And you and I, we kept these from each other until the last minute.
Yeah.
But I did one, you did one. We did a couple things here. First of all, we did no trades on this one, just to kind of see how it stacked up value-wise at those pick selections. We used different simulators. You went Pro Football Network. I went Pro Football Focus, so that we would be drawing from a different big board to account for variance and how things are going to change between now and the draft. And we came up with some differences, and you went a very different way at the top of the draft. I think this will make it interesting for people. So here's what we're going to do. First of all, just got a comment here. I'm not going to read that. Okay. Let's do this. I want to pull up, first of all, let's go here. Both of us. So this is my draft, and I'm going to run through it first. For those of you watching the live stream, we'll make this easier to see. We'll pull this out of here. So we'll run through each of our drafts first, and then we're going to alternate and go round by round and explain our picks. So this is my overall draft. I got Will Anderson Jr. out of Alabama at 5. And when we get to the analysis, I'll talk about how that's not the pipe dream that some people think it might be. At number 20, I went with the center out of Minnesota that suddenly Seahawk fans all know the name of, who they didn't know his name 2 weeks ago, John Michael Schmitz out of Minnesota. He was center 1 going into the Senior Bowl and did nothing but solidify his position there. Second round with the 2 picks there, I went defensive lineman Keanu Benton. Can't wait to talk about him out of Wisconsin. Linebacker Jack Campbell out of Iowa. In the 3rd round, guard Steve Avila out of TCU. In the 4th round, Kenny McIntosh, the running back out of Georgia. In the 5th round, 2 picks there, took a quarterback, Aiden O'Connell out of Purdue. And receiver who I wasn't that familiar with until the Senior Bowl, Jaden Reed out of Michigan State. Really excited to talk about him as well. And then another defensive lineman in the 6th round, Jared Clark out of Coastal Carolina. No 7th round pick because none of the Sims yet have caught up with the fact that the Seahawks do have a 7th round pick this year. They did not have to give up a pick in the, was it the John Reed trade with the Texans?
I think that's what it was.
Where they don't have to give up a 7th, so they do have one. All right, and here is yours. Graphics aren't as pretty, but it's not too bad with my amateur skills. Okay, number 5 overall, quarterback Anthony Richardson out of Florida. Can't wait to dig into this. Then at 20, you also went offensive line, Osiris Torrance, the big guard out of Florida. You chose all through your draft way harder names to pronounce than I did.
My bad.
At number 37 in the 2nd round, edge out of Kansas State, Felix Anudike Uzoma.
Good, nice. Pretty good.
Uzuma. I haven't gotten there yet. The big defensive tackle out of Baylor, Siaki Ika. Outside linebacker DeMarvion Overshone out of Texas in the 3rd round.
See if you got this one.
In the 4th, I'm just going to go Oli Olawatimi. Let's call him Ollie. Olis. I'm not even going to go there. You can see it on the screen.
Good try.
And then an interesting edge player that I want you to talk about when we get there, Brenton Cox Jr. out of Florida, a guy that hasn't been talked about much in this edge class. In this 5th round, the 5th round pick, Julius Brents, long, rangy cornerback out of Kansas State. And another Kansas State player in the 6th round, one of your favorite running backs throughout this process, Deuce Vaughn. So let's do this. First round, I wish I could put both those on the screen. Here's what happened. And here's what I want to touch on at 5. I was just having this conversation today with somebody about, Carter versus Anderson, Jalen Carter, the defensive tackle out of Georgia. That the Seahawks fans, for the most part, really want one of those guys to fall to 5. But I hear this a lot. No way that's going to happen. I think it is possible. And if you look at some of the mock drafts that are coming out from the guys that do this for a living, do it full time. Chad Reuter just came out with a 3-round mock on NFL.com today where this happened as well. There are only 4 quarterbacks that teams feel like are first round picks in this draft. That's it. So if you need a quarterback, you're going to have to be aggressive. And there's some flexibility above the Seahawks because the Bears want to trade out of 1. The Cardinals very well may be looking to trade out of 3. If the team that wants the 3rd quarterback and wants to make sure they get them, especially if they think the Seahawks might be in play for one, they're going to be looking to move up. And there is a chance. There is a world where 3 quarterbacks go before 5. And there is a world where one of the teams in the top 4 likes Carter and his fit more than Anderson. Now, you and I have talked about this. I'm not as big an Anderson fan as some people are. He's just not as physical as I would like. Is he better than some of the edge guys we have, outside linebacker, 3-4 types that we have? Absolutely. I just have questions about fit and about his frame and whether he can add any strength to it. And there's some games you put on where it just doesn't look like he's physically dominant. But universally, this guy's considered as the most talented edge player in this draft and one of the top 2 defensive players. So you get, if Will Anderson falls to 5, I'm guessing the Seahawks just stick and pick. And then at 20, this is interesting how this is shaped up, because a month ago when you and I talked, we thought that 20th pick was kind of no man's land, where it didn't really line up. None of the interior offensive linemen were really ranked that high, so it's a reach. There were a lot of corners and receivers and skill position guys around that area. The run on defensive linemen was kind of thinned out. But now I think, especially after what he did in Mobile, nobody would bat an eye if the Seahawks went Schmitz at 20, and he would be a bona fide Pro Bowl, potential All-Pro center that starts as a rookie from day one and immediately upgrades your interior offensive line.
Yeah, I mean, I think without question, no matter what network you watched, no matter what article you pulled up, no matter what you saw on Twitter, John Michael Schmitz was the winner, the biggest winner of any player at the Senior Bowl. And we all know Seattle loves the Senior Bowl. We've got connections to Mobile as a franchise, to the people that run the Senior Bowl. And you saw it last year. We took a bunch of Senior Bowl guys, and we had one of the greatest drafts of all time. That has not always been the case with the Senior Bowl guys we took, i.e. LJ Collier was a Senior Bowl stud, and I expect him to not be a Seahawk here in the next month or 2. But the way he dominated was a whole nother tier above. You are talking, I know some people don't like the idea of taking a center that early. I think, again, we're talking about the Super Bowl. We're seeing the difference a center can make in this modern NFL. It's a second quarterback. It's the guy that runs the protections and everything. Jason Kelce is probably the greatest center of our generation since Jeff Saturday, probably. Maybe I'm missing somebody, but he's a beast. And Creed Humphrey in 2-3 years looks like the next great center. Those are 2 Hall of Fame caliber centers that we watched yesterday, and they both absolutely ran a clinic, whether it was running or pass. They were fantastic. And John Michael Schmitz, if he can be 80% of those guys, he's worth a first-round pick.
So you said some people don't like to go center that high. Daniel W. is one of them. Got a couple of comments here live. Schmitz at 20 is crazy as fuck. Tyler Linderbaum, the best interior O-line prospect since Quentin Nelson. Don't agree with that. Went 25 overall. Don't draft a center till the 3rd at the earliest. If another team gets Schmitz, so be it. He's not that special. He's 23 years old. Take Joe Tippmann, Alex Forsyth, Luke Whippler in round 3 and beyond. Here's what I want to say to that. At 20, first-round grades are for the most part dried up. Schmitz will have a first-round grade. So if you're taking another position, you're most likely reaching. Second of all, just take good players. Take good players. Good teams don't have any rules like don't take a center till the 3rd round. They don't. They just don't. People think the Seahawks don't draft corners because that's a philosophy of theirs before the 4th or 5th round. Nope. That's just the way the draft has gone for them and the way their needs have gone when they've been on the board over the last 10 years. If they were in a position where the best player on the board was a guy that they thought could be an all-pro corner, they would take a corner in the 1st round. I guarantee it. They don't have rules like that. Good teams don't. John Michael Schmitz immediately elevates that offense, makes it a lot better, and he's a legit first-round grade. At that range, like we were talking earlier, are you taking one of the tight ends? when you have 3 in the room already? Are you taking the 6th best corner? Are you taking the 3rd or 4th best wide receiver? You could argue the guy you're going to take. Do you take the best guard versus the best center? Maybe there's some value in that. But here's the other here's the other problem with Daniel W's argument, and I respect his decision. Everybody has their own ideas about how to draft. Joe Tippmann's not going to be there in the 3rd round. In fact, he might not get out of Thursday either. You're starting to see him sneak into the back end of the 1st round on mock drafts. Alex Forsyth and Luke Whippler, they might be there in the 3rd round. They are so far away from what John Michael Schmitz is. Neither of them have the anchor that Schmitz does. Neither of them are strong enough. They're more like Austin Blythe than John Michael Schmitz. And I would also argue this. The Seahawks not taking center seriously enough is the reason that they've had issues there. You have to commit to it. If that kid's on the board at 20, I'm not passing him up. Let's go over your draft. Anthony Richardson at 5. Tell me about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I have been talking about this for months, probably since we started talking to each other in September, October when college football started. Anthony Richardson is going to be a lightning rod for a lot of people. I think everyone can agree he's one of the most talented prospects in this draft. And the stats don't quite match up with that, but there's a lot to that. So Anthony Richardson, he's 6'4", 236. Gets a lot of comparisons to Josh Allen. Josh Allen is 6'4", I think 235. Or 6'5", 235. So he's a little bit taller, but same weight. Anthony Richardson is a heck of a lot faster than Josh Allen is as a mobile runner. In this season, he completed 54% of his passes. So that's like one of the first things that get everybody a little bit freaked out. He only completed 54% of his passes for about 2,500 yards, had like a 17-9 touchdown interception ratio. He also ran for 654 yards on about 100 carries for 9 touchdowns. I think everybody saw him destroy a Utah Utes team that people were talking about as a potential college football playoff team in week 1 in the Swamp. And then I think he was kind of like, oh my gosh, this guy's the number 1 pick. He's the Heisman favorite. He was making, incredible plays, Patrick Mahomes style plays, throws it harder than anybody, runs faster than everybody. He looks like a video player. Well, then he kind of disappeared because for the rest of the season, he plays on a really bad team at Florida with a new coach who is a good coach, but just definitely not running the style that I believe the Seahawks are going to exactly run. That could be a great fit for him. And so I think that really turned some people off, kind of in the similar way that Will Levis did. I think if Anthony Richardson or Will Levis win 10 games, they are 100% going in the top 4. Like, I don't even think it's a question. I think Indianapolis is like, oh, that's fine. We don't need to trade up with Chicago. We're happy at 4. In my opinion, they are physically more talented than a Bryce Young. It's not even close. Like Bryce Young stacked up on top of each other is about the size of Anthony Richardson. This is maybe considered a little bit, over the top, but like we're talking about a player in Anthony Richardson that is so raw, but his talent, his tools, you can see like it's like Michael Jordan level of skill. The way he throws the ball, the way he moves in the pocket, the way he just outruns safeties and cornerbacks on a Rose Bowl team, right? But he also has kind of that Trey Lance, Justin Fields floor where they look like they can run pretty good. But there's also like, we're probably about 8 games away from being able to decide whether Justin Fields or Trey Lance are going to play in the NFL as a starting quarterback for the next few years. Because right now it doesn't look like they can throw the football. Yeah. Justin Fields can light it up in fantasy football running for 150 yards, but he's not going to be able to hold up for 17 games for the next 5 years if he can't throw the football. Trey Lance, I was there in Santa Clara when Russell Wilson got his last win against the Niners there. He can't throw the football. Like people were yelling, chanting Tim Tebow at him during the game. Like it's that kind of a situation. So he could be that. The comp that you'll see, and I wrote about it a lot this year, he's my number 2 quarterback behind CJ Stroud the whole year. And I've never really gone away from that. His comp is a mixture between Josh Allen and prime Cam Newton. Like that is what he can be. That is an MVP quarterback that can almost like single-handedly carry non-Super Bowl teams to conference championships and Super Bowls. Like people forget prime Cam Newton went 15-1, dominated, won an MVP. We saw it with Jalen Hurts. He's a bigger, faster Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts is 6'1", 235. Okay. Similar size, but a little bit longer. And Anthony Richardson runs faster. I think you can draft him and people are going to be pissed because I still think Seattle's going to keep Geno. You can keep him and you can develop him for a year or two, just like the Chiefs did with Alex Smith and Patrick Mahomes. But unlike with Mahomes, you can also use him this year to help you win games. You can use him in the short yardage. Use him like the Eagles use Jalen Hurts. Let's steal that 4th and 1 play, right? Until that play gets made illegal, or like, type of trick plays, not kind of necessarily wildcat, but like wildcat with a quarterback that can throw. I think he's a guy that can help you get a couple first downs and a couple touchdowns during the season while learning and developing. It's a hot subject. He is going to go in the top 10. Like, I don't care what anybody says. He's going to light it up at the combine. He's going to light it up at the pro day. And this is a guy that is going no chance. He is like I said, there is some Michael Jordan-esque tools there that other quarterbacks do not have. Not a single quarterback in this draft has it. I have CJ Stroud above him just for more of like immediate right away. You can go win, 12 games with CJ Stroud in the right situation. Anthony Richardson probably needs a year or two, but if you unlock him, you're looking at a potential Patrick Mahomes type talent.
And here's what I would say. I'm glad you mentioned Mahomes. Here's what I would say to people that just really think this would be a disaster just because they see the completion percentage and they've watched a couple of games where he didn't play well or he wasn't accurate with the football. The issues with Richardson are mechanical, and they're things that can be taught and coached. When you talk to people who have been around him in the program or who have scouted him, the intangible stuff is off the charts. Leader, student of the game, studies hard, works hard, carries himself the way a quarterback should. And
important things, by the way, those are important things.
Yeah. And process as well. I've seen enough film breakdowns of this kid from people who really know their stuff that he processes well and he sees the game well. People forget that quarterbacks get better. There were major question marks about Patrick Mahomes coming out of college and his accuracy and was he a little bit too much of a gunslinger and could that fit in the NFL? And major question marks about Josh Allen and his level of competition coming out and Jalen Hurts, there were people who wrote him off. Can't throw the football. Just a runner, just a gadget player. Well, he proved people wrong. And you know why? Because he got better. Russell Wilson, we watched Russell Wilson grow mechanically and improve his game while he was here. So that's what's enticing to NFL teams because they believe they can unlock a guy that has those kinds of tools.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, Anthony Richardson, he had a higher completion percentage than Josh Allen his last year, and that's in the SEC. Whereas Josh Allen was at Wyoming. And we saw what happens when you fix Josh Allen. He goes from 53% to close to 60%, and all of a sudden he becomes a top 3 MVP candidate. Mm-hmm. And then the last thing is in Richardson's 2 games where he was the most overwhelmed in talent, or his 3 most games, Utah, Tennessee, and Georgia were his 3 best games he played. And in the Georgia game, he got his ankle basically rolled up on the very first play, couldn't run. Couldn't use his feet against probably one of the greatest college football teams we've seen. I know there's been a lot of good ones recently, but that Georgia team was special, and he still kept Florida in that game. It wasn't always pretty, but he had to be able to figure out how to keep up with Georgia throwing the football, and he stayed within 1 score until I believe about 10 or 11 minutes left to go in that game. That's what you want to see from your franchise quarterback. Do they play their best when it matters the most?
Absolutely. And for anyone listening to this or watching this who's scared of this idea, or just doesn't think it's ever going to happen, just keep in mind, just think back. John Schneider has fallen in love with a few quarterbacks, has attempted to acquire a few quarterbacks. And if he falls in love with Anthony Richardson, he's there at 5, and he thinks he can be a future franchise quarterback, he'll take him. I mean, that's one thing we know about John Schneider. Talk about the pick at 20, Osiris Torrance, big right guard out of Florida.
Yeah, he's a mountain man. Talking about if we took Anthony Richardson, let's make this a good environment for him. Let's make this a comfortable place for him. So let's give him a teammate that he played really well with last year. Um, Osiris Torrance, 6'5", 347 pounds, right? You and I have talked about getting bigger, getting meaner, getting tougher in the interior, both offensively and defensively. That is a man that is going to move mountains for this run game. That is a man that is also going to pass block really well. He dominated at Louisiana. He transferred with, I can't remember their coach's name. It escaped me, but transferred with the coach to Florida, dominated this year at Florida. On a team that really didn't have a whole lot else around them from a receivers, from a defense. And then again, you're talking about Senior Bowl standouts. This was another guy that got a lot of positive love from the Senior Bowl. There was some rumors about him playing center, but for me, if I'm drafting him as a guard. I think that's where he's best suited.
Yeah.
I know PFF, I looked it up earlier. They grade him as a very good blocker, a pass blocker, but he was an elite run blocker towards the end of the regular season for Florida. I think he was the highest rated run blocking guard in the SEC around Thanksgiving.
Yeah, when I first looked at him about halfway through the season, I can't remember which game I watched, but I wasn't really impressed with the first tape I saw on him. I thought he was just a little slow-footed, kind of a plotter. My opinion changed drastically throughout the year. Just watching his tape and watching him move at his size and just how well he positions himself and moves his feet and shields guys off, and the way he likes to hunt on the second level. He's not one of those big dudes that just gets his initial block and then watches what happens. He's looking for someone else to hit. He's a plug and play guard at right guard, where we expect Gabe Jackson to be a cap casualty this offseason. So certainly makes sense to take Torrance. So we both go offensive line at 20. So let's look at my second round. At pick number 37, Keanu Benton. I've come to call him a poor man's Jalen Carter. Similar dimensions, 6'5", 305, I think. A guy that I wasn't very familiar with until Senior Bowl practices and just the buzz he generated. And I put on, the first tape I put on was Michigan State. And literally the first 3 snaps of that game, go to YouTube and go Wisconsin versus Michigan State, 2022. The first 3 snaps of that game, he wrecks. He just single-handedly wrecks. He's strong. He's physical. He's good hand usage. He's got some pass rush moves. He's got some wiggle to him. Plays with great leverage. Never gets pushed back. Great motor. And he continued. He looked that way in Mobile too, and looked that way in the game. A guy that if you can't get Carter at the top, that second round, there's a couple of interesting defensive tackles, of which you took one of them. And then neither of us in these drafts took Kalijah Cansey. That's a guy that we'll talk about as we get closer to the draft. That's really interesting. But, one thing that Pete Carroll has talked about, and we all agree, is they got to get bigger up front. And he name dropped Eric Armstead and Nick Bosa in San Francisco when he talks about the need to get better up front, to get more physical. And I think Keanu Benton is a guy that would fit perfectly there. He could play, not only could he play the nose, but he's a guy that can stand up a little bit and play that big, 5 technique in a 3-4 big defensive end. So I do want to make this comment. I left him on here. I like PFF's big board for the most part, but some of their stuff is just crazy with their gradings. John Michael Schmidt's getting an F at 20. I think they're doing a big update right now. You said you tried to do a draft on there today. You can only do 2 rounds. They're probably going to update that. There's no way he's an F at 20. Benton is a D- at 37 is kind of laughable too. And then at 51, I took Jack Campbell, a guy we've talked about before. You talk about needing size, especially at that middle linebacker spot. And Jack Campbell's that guy. Kind of reminds me a little bit of KJ Wright. I think he's 6'4", 235, 240, long dude, almost Jack Lambert kind of build. Kind of plays that way too. He's got an edge. He's nasty, sheds blocks well, does the dirty work. He's a guy that could play the Mike linebacker spot while Jordan Brooks is recovering from ACL. And then, there could even be a conversation about maybe Brooks' best fit is at will. Again, like he played as a little bit more as a rookie when Bobby was here. But Jack Campbell can cover a little bit too, and can cover some tight ends, and he's a little more athletic than you might think. But just a physical a guy who attacks the run, is always moving forward, which is something I think they need.
The Benton is interesting because I think this happens too often in college football. No, like we're going to talk about that guard you have here next here in a little bit. But if TCU doesn't have a special season, nobody's really talking about Avila. If Wisconsin didn't tank and fire their really good coach, Paul Chryst, halfway through the year or towards the end of the year, and they're ranked, I think Benton gets a lot more publicity if they're in the hunt for a Big Ten, championship appearance and a big bowl game. I think he's a guy you're looking at possibly trading back, and getting that pick 24, 25. But because they had such a bad year, he doesn't get any love. And now it's all like, which is kind of the weird part of the draft. It's all, what you did during the season, also some of the publicity that you've had all year. Like since last year's, college football championship, Bryce Young's been the number one quarterback. Everyone says, oh, he's the number one quarterback. Yeah. I don't believe that, but that's kind of just the thing that's carrying over. Yeah. And then it's, I just think Benton is a potential sneaky late first round kind of guy that you could get there. And then Captain Jack, man, PFF graded him as the number one coverage linebacker, which I thought was very, very interesting. Solid, steady Iowa linebackers, man, they get the job done. Personally, I think you move Jordan to the will, and it's not even a discussion as long as Jack plays like he was playing in the Big Ten.
It's I think the combine is going to be important for him. If he runs well and puts some good shuttle times up at that size, he can solidify that second round spot for
the number 2 ranked defense in college football, and he was the captain of it. There's something to that, I think.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about your second round.
Yeah, pick number 37. This is a little bit of an interesting spot. So, you don't go defensive end or edge rush at the first 2 picks, which I don't think there is one worth it at 20. And 5, we went a different route. So 37, this is a guy you'll see in mocks at the 50 range. You might see him early first. I think it's a great fit for him at pick 37, Felix Anaduke Uzama from Kansas State. And I'm just going to get this out of the way. So, I am a huge Oklahoma Sooners fan. I didn't take any Sooners in this draft, so I can stay away from being biased. I do not like Kansas State, but I'm going to talk about Kansas State in this football program a lot here. I respect the heck out of them. That is the all motor university, and that's something I'm going to talk about a lot. This guy, Felix, he's 6'3", 255, played a little bit of outside linebacker, a lot of some big defensive end. Their coach Kleiman, who basically had the dynasty at North Dakota State, came to Kansas State. Shocking stealing of a Big 12 championship in his second or third year there. He had 50 tackles and 9 sacks averaged the past 2 seasons under Kleiman's defense and stuff. So a really productive player. That's a lot of tackles for someone that puts his hand on the ground a lot. Also, I grade him as probably the highest motor of all the defensive ends, get to the quarterback kind of guys in my draft. And that's something I think I've told you about for a long time. Like, this guy just has kicked the living crap out of Oklahoma's NFL offensive linemen for the last 2 years, whether it's in Kansas State or at Oklahoma. He single-handedly ruined. They played Oklahoma. Oklahoma was ranked 5th in the country, and they were still thinking, really well, really high thoughts. And, just Cincinnati. Obviously, he's about 10 or 12, but Trent pushes you on your ass kind of a guy, from Cincinnati, which is someone I know you and we've talked a lot about Cincinnati and their style of play. We need some guys that are just going to bull rush some people and blow up rush plays and also just get to the quarterback, not kind of the way Darrell Taylor does it every time, where he overruns somebody and you leave a whole lane open or you're getting blasted in the run game. This is a guy, his motor, his smarts, his fundamental coaching and program that he's raised in. I think he's a day one starter that can go out and go get you 40 or 50 tackles and 9 sacks in the NFL. I think he's an immediate guy that's going to play at his level. I don't know if you're ever going to get a superstar potential from a guy like him, but that's a guy that's going to come in right away and be a starter on a good team, which is what you need. You need good players. You don't need 30 superstars. That'd be great. But you need some good, solid players that aren't going to screw up and they aren't going to blow their rush assignment. They're not going to blow contain. They're not going to take 4 weeks to get, their hand on a quarterback. This is a guy that's going to touch the quarterback every Sunday. So I really like him.
And then you go with the
And
big
then I
dude.
got
You
here.
get the Seahawks nose
Yeah.
tackle.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if I want to bring that quarterback or that running back over to Felix, I need a mountain inside. This has been probably my favorite defensive tackle in this draft, other than Jalen Carter, who I'd kind of consider as he is a defensive tackle that can do a lot of stuff. You're not getting that versatility with Siaki Ika, but you're getting a man that you're going to put in the middle. If we're staying in any type of 3-4 or we're staying in any type of bare front, this is a man that is going to instantly take our 31st ranked rush defense and I think bring it all the way into the teens. Like just having he's 6'4", 350 pounds.
Yeah.
Has almost the identical size as Vita Vea. I think when you can, and that's the comparison you're going to see a lot. I don't want to say it's lazy. I do see some of it, but I don't think they're the same player. Nobody moves as fast as Vita Vea does for his size, and that is not Ika's game. Vita Vea is a guy that's going to get you 6 or 7 sacks. Vita Vea is a guy that's going to get you, or I'm sorry, Ika is going to be a guy that's going to get you 3 sacks. But he's going to shut down the run game and he's going to push that center or that guard into that quarterback and not let that quarterback step up, which will allow for more wobbly passes, which means Tariq Woolen is going to get that defensive rookie of the year that he should have gotten. So instead, he's going to be kind of an equal run defender, lesser of a pass rusher, but he, like I said, he's going to guy that's just going to lean on an offensive line for 4 quarters and he's going to wear out an offensive line.
All right, let's go third round. In my third round, you touched on it earlier. I go and I get my guard, and that's Steve Avila. And he's a guy that you turned me on to initially about halfway through the season, and got to see a lot of him, obviously, with TCU in the playoffs. Just a big mountain of a dude at right guard, but similar to Torrance, moves well for that size, solid pass protector, but just a beast in the run game. And what's fun about this pairing is we got to see Schmitz and Avila lining up side by side at center and right guard at the Senior Bowl. They were on the same line. In fact, at one point, Avila was playing left guard. Mm-hmm. Schmitz at center, Torrance was at right guard. That was the line for that team. And so all of our guys were in there. But Avila is a guy that's just I think he could be a day one starter. He's a guy that just gives you a lot more physicality up front, but moves well enough. Some people might say he's not a perfect scheme fit, but I think he moves well enough from what I've seen that he could play in that outside zone, or you can adapt some things to him. Because I don't think he's that different physically or athletically from what Phil Haynes is. He's more of a bigger, kind of a mauling type of guard. I think Steve Avila just improves your physicality up front. And then in the third round,
man, him and John Michaels together, that's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. I just think, we saw it from about the midway point, the Tampa Bay game, kind of on, where teams just started to pick on the interior. They started to run more twists and stunts. At least that's what I was seeing. And they just picked on Blythe and his inability to anchor against power rush and bull rush. Moved well. He's a good zone guy, but just not someone you could really run behind. And then when you put him next to Gabe Jackson, who just looks like, that 37-year-old power hitter who just lost his bat speed and he just doesn't have that edge anymore. It was a kind of a lethal combination. Third round for you, you went defense again with DeMarvion Overshown out of Texas.
Yeah, a linebacker I really like. He's kind of undersized, 6'4", 217. But if I would just describe Overshown, I would say it in one word: explosive. This guy is explosive. When he came to Texas, he was a defensive back that developed into a linebacker the last couple years. So he has the speed, has the ability to play coverage, and now he's learning to play as a linebacker, and he's putting on more weight each and every year. And so I'm really interested what to see when he gets into an NFL facility and they put 10 more pounds on him, maybe even a little bit more. If he can keep, most of that explosiveness, you have an elite Swiss Army knife that can play in coverage, be a linebacker, rush the passer. This season, he had 96 total tackles, 10 for a loss, and he had 4 sacks. The year before, when Caleb Williams was at Oklahoma, there's a play where he blitzed and just next Caleb Williams as he tried to run away from him. Like there wasn't even an ounce of doubt of who was more athletic in that moment in time. And so that's the kind of explosiveness I want to see. I can't help but watch his tape and see a little bit of Jamal Adams when Jamal Adams was in his prime. Obviously, he's a lot lighter. I think this is another guy where if you want to take Henley from Washington State, who is a Senior Bowl darling, I think you know a little bit about him, right? He was a Cougar, right?
Yeah, just a little bit. It's interesting that
Yeah,
neither of us.
no, he's an absolute.
Yeah, I think what's fun about Overshown, and I was thinking Henley as you were talking about him, is, some people might say, here we've been talking about size up until this point all the way through, and then you get to a guy like Overshown who's built like a tall safety. Defenses are changing, and the Seahawks second half of last season played a lot more nickel, and that might be the direction they go, especially if they can get a little bit more pressure up front with just their defensive line, and having those hybrid type players that can run and cover, guys like Overshown and Henley. And some of those, we saw a lot of smallish linebackers at the Senior Bowl running around, guys who weren't prototypical size, but they can cover. And that's, Overshown's a guy that can come off the edge too. He's got those long arms and he's got that quick get off. Interesting player. Let's stick with you to go to your fourth round pick and talk about. I took Schmitz, got a center in the first round, but this would play into the comment we got earlier from Daniel W. that, hey, you can get a center later, and that's what you did here in the fourth round.
Yeah, Olusegun Oluwatimi is his name. I watched him pronounce his name 2 or 3 times on YouTube a couple weeks ago. This guy is 6'3", 301 pounds. He's my number 2 center. Me personally, I think that's something, you and I have talked about personally, because I think his specific specialty is pass blocking. I think this is a guy that needs to work on his run blocking, needs to refine this. This is a guy that I do have a little bit of concern about if he's your starting center day one. If the Seahawks play the Rams next year and Aaron Donald's lining up right next to him, he might blow up Oluwatimi a few times in the run game. But what his specialty is that you are not sacking my quarterback. Before the TCU game last year, you talked last time on the podcast, 386 pass attempts from Michigan last year, before the bowl game, 0 sacks allowed by this man. He won the Remington Award. He won the Outland Award. When he was at Virginia, he was the best center in the ACC. He comes over to the Big Ten, which might be one of the greatest years of all time for centers in like college football in one conference. You're talking Schmitz, Tippmann, Whippler, and Oluwatimi, like 4 dudes that are probably starting at some point next season. Like that's really impressive. And he won Remington Award and Outland Award. Like he was considered the best in that sense, not necessarily like translating to the NFL. He's a guy that, I don't know if he'll be there at 123. I was excited to see him at 123. He played well in the Senior Bowl. I liked what I saw from him. I believe he was lined up next to Mauch from North Dakota State. I'm not sure if he ever had much time with Avila, but looked good. They ran the ball a couple times with him right up the gut, and he did a decent job. It's just one of those things where I think it makes sense to re-sign Blythe and tell a guy like, if you're not going to take Schmitz, if you're not going to do that, then I would sign him, cheap deal. And then you bring in a guy like this and you give him a chance to outperform Blythe. But you look at this NFC West that could have a Jalen Carter on the front line that will have probably at least one more year of Aaron Donald.
Everything else we got to worry about. Right?
Yeah. And then the 49ers, like they might lose Armstead this year or cut Armstead. I think there's a chance Buckner gets cut or gets traded, and I could see, San Francisco bringing him back and reworking a deal. And that's something I've talked to you about that I'm interested in for Seattle. But this is a guy that I think halfway through next year, if you give him the time, I think he's going to end up being the second best center in this draft, which is saying a lot because Schmitz, I think, is one of the best center prospects to come into play. Sorry, Daniel W., but Schmitz is the best center prospect since Quentin Nelson.
There you go. My fourth round pick, I've been reading a lot. I think this is a little bit of recency bias. Just seen a lot of things the last couple of days from Jeremiah, from Dane Brugler, talking about the depth and strength of this running back class. And it's hard for me to envision the Seahawks coming out of this without taking a young running back with all the picks they have. And I expect them to make a couple of trades and end up with more than 10 picks. Kenny McIntosh is a guy in the fourth round I think makes all the sense in the world. He matches the Seahawks, size that they like. He's 6 foot. I think he's 210, 212. Catches the ball really well out of the backfield, as well as he's shown moments of being a dynamic runner at Georgia. PFF gives me an F for taking him at 122. There's some other guys. There's some other guys in the fourth round I could have taken. They're just little different shapes and styles. Some bigger dudes like Chris Rodriguez or Evan. Is it Evan Knoll, the kid out of Northwestern that had the good Senior Bowl? I like McIntosh though because of what he can provide in the passing game. And just be a kind of a cool compliment to Kenneth Walker. And then let's go there. So you went through the fourth round. So then I'll go fifth round, then we'll go back to you because 2 picks in the fifth. So I've really wrestled when I do these sims on taking a quarterback. And most of the time I don't because it just doesn't line up. That there's too much value usually in these 2 fifth-round picks we have at other positions. And the quarterbacks that I like are gone. Liked what I saw from Aiden O'Connell in the Shrine game and the week leading up to it out of Purdue. The knock on him is he doesn't really have a gun, doesn't really have a strong arm, but he has every bit the arm that Brock Purdy does, and he's going to be the gold standard now for late round drafted quarterbacks. And he's bigger than Purdy. I think he's more athletic, known as a real fiery leader, a guy that really commands the huddle, that guys love playing with and playing for. And it just makes sense to me, unless you bring back Drew Lock as your backup to Geno and you bring both of them back, which there have been reports they're interested in doing. It just makes sense to give a guy a shot that's got some experience starting multiple years in college that has some tools. And then this is another guy similar to Keanu Benton that I just wasn't that familiar with before the Senior Bowl. But every time I saw Jaden Reed run a route or catch a football, he stood out to me. He's just 6 foot, kind of reminds me size-wise of Paul Richardson a little bit. And his game just seems to me to be one that would complement what the Seahawks already have in Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. Just a really dynamic route runner who's athletic and has the top-end speed, can go deep, catches the ball well, and might have been the most consistent receiver the entire week in Mobile. So that takes me through the fifth round. Any thoughts on those dudes?
Yeah, man, he looked great in the Senior Bowl. If he's a potential number 3 type receiver, that's something Seattle definitely needs. I know that's something that you and I kind of didn't really attack there in the first couple days of the draft. I think that's it's hard to read. This wide receiver market's kind of hit and miss. There's some potential former Rams guys like a Robert Woods that are probably going to get cut. Do they go back to LA or does Shane Waldron scoop them up? And so that's something that I'm interested in for a cheap third option. But I also think we need to draft a wide receiver because the contracts of Metcalf and Lockett get very, very pricey in the following season, not the one that we're just about to have.
Yeah.
And so I like that. And then O'Connell, man, he's a big dude. If you give him time in the pocket, he's gonna pick teams apart. When he doesn't have time in the pocket, it's ugly. So it's just one of those things where if you have a great offensive line and you need him for one drive in a playoff game, like the Chiefs needed Chad Henne to go down there in the divisional round, that's a guy that maybe in a couple of years you got where if you can protect him, he's going to, not lose the game for you, basically.
Yeah. All right. Tell me about Brenton Cox at pick number 153, edge out of Florida.
Yeah, really interesting story. So he's 6'4", 255, had a fantastic year last year at Florida. I believe he had double-digit sacks, just caused a lot of chaos, and on a team that was really good for the first half of the year, and then they fell apart, fired their coach, and things went really weird after that. He is a defensive end that most people believe is going to play as an outside linebacker that might still rush the quarterback every once in a while in the NFL, which I look at that as, okay, well, we don't have Darrell Taylor extended past next season, so maybe this is a guy that could potentially replace him if we decide we don't want to pay Darrell Taylor with his health issues and just his style of play, if that fits what Seattle wants to do. He, in my opinion, is a potential first-round talent that has some real attitude issues. And that is the reason why he is so low on this. I think most mocks have him ranked in the top, between 130 and 160. That's not what his skill set screams. His skill set screams a guy that I would probably take at the end of the second, early third round. But after 1 year at Georgia, got kicked off the team for issues. Had a really great year at Florida, and then not even halfway through, a couple games into this season, when Florida at one point was ranked really high after beating Utah, him and the staff, this new staff, mutually agreed to part ways. When have you ever heard that in college football? Very rare, very weird.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't really make much sense to me what happened. He got interviewed by the Senior Bowl, and he's just been very vague about it. Hey, I'm really big on culture. I want to be a leader. Attitude, something I really want to be great at. He never really acknowledged that he screwed up. He never acknowledged that he did anything wrong at Florida. It was just a mutual parting of the ways. So I think that's something that Pete Carroll and John Snyder, when they get him into a room at the combine or at the I don't even know where he's going to do a pro day. Probably not going to do a pro day, since I doubt he's with the Florida program anymore. But at the combine, that is something that we need Pete and them to figure out, what went wrong. Because if you can get past that, and if there's a coach that you can history of overcome has made some mistakes, it is Pete. And I think he has a good read on a person after some some successes and some failures of if this guy can come around and be a help for Seattle. Because if you can unlock him, that is 2024, and I believe he could potentially be an upgrade over a Darrell Taylor, who's not been bad. He just has a hard time staying on the field.
Yeah. And then we'll go with your second, fifth round pick, and then we'll both give our final picks. But Julius Brents is a guy that I first noticed about halfway through the season, just because he was so long. And this is before I'd really gotten familiar with the rest of the cornerback class, in which being over 6 foot is not an anomaly in this class. A lot of longer, taller, bigger corners. But Julius Brents really, I think he's 6'2", struggled in their conference championship game at times, but really, really played well down the stretch, and a guy that might have been the second or third best corner in Mobile. Darius Rush had a great week. A couple other guys really stood out, but Julius Brents just was sticky in coverage and matched up with all the receivers that were down there. What do you like about Brents and his fit here potentially in Seattle?
Yeah, unfortunately, in the last week or so, word's gotten out about this guy. This was a guy that was probably almost a guarantee to be here at 156. If we're being honest, probably
Because
by
it was, they did
this
TCU, right?
spring.
Were they matched up with
what was that? Sorry,
TCU in their conference championship game? Wasn't that Kansas State TCU? He struggled trying to cover Johnson, I think.
Yeah.
But just looked great in the Senior Bowl.
Yes, he did not play great, and did not look great in the Sugar Bowl either. But this is a guy that physically looks the part of almost a poor man's Tariq Woolen, and has a very similar season as a Tariq Woolen. Had some great plays when Tariq was at UTSA. Had some great plays, also got burned a few times. This is a guy that had 4 picks. On their website, they say he's 6'4", 204. I don't think he's 6'4", but he's definitely at least 600 pounds. When I watched him, this dude hits hard. This dude reminds me of prime Richard Sherman, the way he would just blow up a run play or blow up a bubble screen, which I don't know about you. I'm so sick and tired of watching screen passes and bubble screens just get lit up, against our defense and stuff. Those are easy. Those are basically passing running plays that are so easy to do. And we give up massive plays every single time. And the 49ers run an offense completely based on those types of things. And so this is a guy that could maybe blow up a Brandon Ayuk, and get after him. There's some talk about him possibly becoming a safety. I don't necessarily see that. I think this is a guy that you put him in Pete Carroll's system. Like you said, he got burned. His footwork needs a lot of help. That's kind of the read, the vibe that you see here a lot, which Seattle runs a very specific, the way their kick step and all those things. If that's something that he can take to, that's great. You have a potential number 2 corner that is a physical upgrade over anybody that's on the roster, including Kobe Bryant. If he doesn't work, you have a physical specimen that could be a great special teams player for the next couple of years. And so that's kind of, I really like him. Again, I think he's going to do well in the combine. He's going to do well in the pro day. And he's a guy that athletically people are going to drool over. But that was the same thing with Tariq Woolen, and he was still there in the round that we got him, which I believe was the 4th to the 5th round.
Yeah, and it's such a deep corner class. Some of those guys are going to slip through the cracks. The thing you mentioned, the Sugar Bowl, the thing that does stand out to me is there were a couple of plays early in the game where he got burned and got tagged for illegal contact, a little bit of holding, but he came back and made some plays later in the game where he was, and I thought that showed me something. That goldfish kind of memory and mentality and being able to bounce back. My final pick in the 6th round at 197, even though I got Benton earlier, and I mentioned he's a guy that I think he can move around the defensive line a little bit. Since I didn't get Ika in the 2nd round, I wanted to get a dude that weighed 350 pounds. And Jared Clark from Coastal Carolina kind of stood out, made a little bit of a name for himself down in Mobile, and a guy that looked like he belonged there, even from a smaller school. Just a big dude that can play the nose and hold at the point of attack. Not much more there to say. I just think in the 6th round, you're looking for value, and the Seahawks have had really good luck historically with undrafted free agents at nose tackle, guys like Brian Monet and Poona Ford was undrafted. And Jared Clark maybe in the 6th round to make some sense for what they're looking for, especially with Monet potentially facing the end of his career with what you're hearing about that knee injury and how severe that was at the end of last year. Certainly won't be available for the 2023 season. And then the potential that, Al Wood's contract may be one that might be a little more valuable being released than being on the roster and at his advancing age. And it might make sense to add another body there and a guy that can hold tight at the point of attack.
Yeah, I think that was someone that Emery Hunt on your guys' show talked about, right?
No, he did. A guy that stood out to him. Yeah, indeed. You went with a guy that's not 350 pounds as your final pick in the draft. I took a little bit bigger running back.
The exact opposite.
Yeah, Deuce Vaughn. He's been a favorite of yours since you and I really first started talking draft about quarter of the way through the season.
Yeah. I spend, all this time, tweeting, writing about how Seattle needs to get bigger, tougher, stronger. And now I'm, promoting drafting a guy that's 5'6", 172 pounds. Deuce Vaughn is one of the most fun players to watch in college football these last 2 years. Fantastic guy. Was the whole entire offense at Kansas State on a team that had some, really huge, massive wins, Big 12 championship. We talked again about that Kansas State motor. Felix has it. Julius Brents has it. Deuce Vaughn is like the embodiment when you think of that program and just outworking someone. He is that. This guy is Darren Sproles reincarnated.
Yeah.
1,500 rushing yards, 400 yards receiving, 12 total touchdowns. He didn't do any special teams this year because they were trying to keep him safe. The year before, he was a monster in special teams. All right. And Kansas State is a program that has a history of special teams monsters. Before Tyler Lockett broke his leg, he was a Pro Bowl special teams player. Right. And people kind of forget about that because now he's a borderline Hall of Fame, level receiver, the way he's producing the last few years. But he was a fantastic returner. He played at Kansas State. As an Oklahoma fan, the ghost of Darren Sproles still haunts me to this day, the way he ran over Oklahoma over and over and over every year in the Big 12. It cost us a Big 12 championship. But this is a guy, Seattle needs more basically assholes in the trenches. They need guys that aren't going to get pushed around anymore on the offensive side. They're going to push back. And they need on the defensive side a bunch of guys that are going to push and bully, in this division that has some really great teams. And then a conference that, we just saw with Philadelphia, they look like the ultimate bully in the NFC, and they're not necessarily going anywhere. At the same time, we also need to get a little more twitchy. We need some guys that can break a tackle or two. How many tackles did Tyler Lockett or DK Metcalf break this year? Right?
Yeah.
Marquise Goodwin was fantastic for us, but he was more of like a red zone kind of guy or a chain mover guy. That was not the biggest yak guy. Noah Fant, has all the skills, but he looks a lot slower than the first round top 20 pick that he was. Colby Parkinson, great running down the seam. Will Dissly, not really a yak kind of guy. Right. Kenneth Walker has that, but this is also your franchise running back that you're kind of leaning on for the next couple of years. We need a drop-off back. Now, I don't necessarily think Homer, who had some good moments this year, but I believe is a free agent, in Dallas, we need that drop down, that scat back, I think it was Scott Service that talks about it on the Mariners. Like, I love my scat backs, Haggerty and Dylan Moore, because they do the dirty work, they get the job done, which, they steal their base. I think that's the same thing with the Deuce Vaughn. You put him in there on third down or second down on passing situations. If there's any pressure from Geno, he doesn't have to throw into tight windows every single time or throw it up to DK when he's been. You can just check it down to Deuce, and he can take a 2-yard pass and break 1 or 2 tackles. Like Kenneth Gainwell is what we saw in the Super Bowl. Kenneth Gainwell looked good. Jerick McKinnon, Kadarius Toney, Sky Moore. Those are the types of players that obviously are a lot higher rated than a Deuce Vaughn, but Deuce Vaughn was a better college football player than all those guys. But because he's 2 inches shorter than all those guys, nobody wants to give him a shot. And the same thing happened with Darren Sproles. And I think if you take a chance on a guy like that, that's a guy that's going to convert probably 20, 25 first downs for you this season, maybe, that you maybe would not have had. And then who knows, if you are able to bring back Godwin, I can't even say his last name, our punt and kick returner, that was fantastic for the end of the season for us. But if Deuce Vaughn's back there too, that's exciting. So that's a guy that I think you can get in the 7th round that's going to play some valuable time for you.
And I remind people of this all the time. I like to go back sometimes to Pete Carroll's introductory press conference when he was first hired, because it's fun to watch, because he talks about his vision and he talks about the culture he wants to build and how the style of play and about running the football and being physical and being tough and hitting you on defense and everything in the way that they built them up until, these last couple of years really mirrored that. But one of the things he also talked about at that first press conference from day one is, I like guys that can score touchdowns. We got to have guys that can score touchdowns and add those dynamic playmakers to it too. And you have to, I think it's just one of those things that you got to add a player or two every single year that can help you do that. And because those guys get beat up, those running backs, they get mileage on their tires and they get worn down. You got to keep adding youth to that room, and receivers too. Receivers get paid. You want to keep them, and they, So I think it's a fun pick. I think it would, especially like in this scenario, I think there's a realistic chance that the Seahawks bring back Rashad Penny. The running back market's not going to be lucrative this offseason. There's a ton of quality free agents available. And we talked about the depth and quality of this running back class. That's going to depress costs. And so coming off an injury, if you have Rashad Penny come back as a guy that's a little more versatile, bigger guy, and you have Deuce Vaughn as that kind of change of pace, what some of us kind of thought Homer could be, but Homer was never this explosive. Mm-hmm. I think it'd be fun. It'd be fun. That's the word for it, for sure. Let me ask you this. When you look at your draft, what's the one thing you wanted that you didn't get, or the one thing that you don't like about it?
When I look at it, I think I feel a little bit weird at the 83 spot with that linebacker there, because I personally think this linebacker market draft class is really strong. I think Dorian Williams out of Tulane was fantastic. The Pace brothers from Cincinnati are really good. We talked about Henley. There's guys that fall back, and there's also those like lower tier guys that you can just put in, and they're gonna make some tackles. That's the thing that was always frustrating about Cody Barton. We took him in like the 3rd round. You can get the production that Cody Barton gave, and I know he gets a raw deal to an extent, but he is not good. But that's a guy I can go get as an undrafted free agent. Like John Radigan played against the 49ers, and there was not that much of a difference, in level of poor play from the linebacker position, I believe, or it was Tanner Muse, one of those guys. I can't remember which one came in there in that second half in Seattle, but So again, Overshown is fun. He's a Swiss Army knife. I just kind of wonder, could I do a little bit more there? And then again, like I talk about, I didn't, receiver. And that's something that at pick 20, I have a really hard time with, because I wonder, does O'Torrance, can I get a Jarrett Patterson from Notre Dame, who I actually really like? Can I get a Steve Avila? But I don't know if those guys are there at 83, whereas I feel 52 might be a little bit early for a Jarrett Patterson for me, or an Avila type of a moment. But I feel like it's going to be really hard at 20 if Quentin Johnson, Jordan Addison, or Jackson Smith and Jigba are there. But that's me just being a little bit greedy of like, oh man, could you imagine Lockett, Metcalf, and one of those three guys?
Yeah.
Because I'm a lot higher on Quentin Johnson than a lot of people are.
Yeah. He seems to be slipping. I'm with you. I think that's a weird part.
And I see. Yeah.
When it comes to receivers, I've done the same thing. I've wrestled with that, and taken a receiver at 20, but I don't like how it works out when I do that, because the interior offensive line, there's usually a run between 20 and 37. And it just leaves me with my second tier, my third tier. And I just think that's that important of a thing to focus on. The thing I like about your draft is that you went multiple edge guys, because I think when we talk about allocation of funds and payroll to be able to absorb a veteran quarterback contract, if that's what they're going to do, is that's one position. I think the Seahawks have made their statement when they traded Frank Clark a few years ago. They didn't want to play at the top of that range. They didn't want to pay $20 million to edge guys. They didn't want to pay that to Clowney. And so they let him walk. I think there's a hard line there. And so that's a position that if you just keep drafting and adding multiple players to that group every single year, then you cover yourself against busts. If a guy like Darrell Taylor doesn't turn out to be what you thought he was going to be, or a guy like Alton Robinson gets hurt, then, those guys are hungry and they want to get paid, and you're getting them, in that range. I like the fact that you basically triple dipped there. I mean, Cox is a project. You're taking a risk on his attitude, but even Overshown is a guy that, the way he's built, if he doesn't really, fit as a true linebacker, he can kind of be that hybrid sort of edge guy too. So, and the thing in my, I didn't get a corner, and in most drafts, I'm trying to do that. And I didn't get a second edge. And those are two of the things that maybe instead of taking O'Connell in the 5th round, I could have done that. Or maybe even in the 6th round. I can't remember now specifically if any of the corners maybe slipped through. But I think that range, maybe in the 4th round instead of McIntosh, I could have gone corner. But I feel good enough about the group they have. I think they're going to bring Michael Jackson back on a restricted deal. We didn't even see Trey Brown this year. I think they're still really high on him. And so it's just those guys, I think they're pretty well taken care of there. Outside of that, maybe the quarterback was a luxury pick, and I could have got more value at 153 for a guy that would contribute more in his first or second year. But I think we both had pretty solid drafts. We've done so damn many of them that, by the time the draft happens, we're going to be able to go back and go, oh yeah, I had him taking that guy. Yeah. In one of my 300 drafts.
Right.
Sure
Yeah. Right. I think like the one thing that was most clear doing this draft is no matter what, like whether I went Jalen Carter first or whether I went Tyree Wilson, because I've done probably 150 taking Tyree Wilson, because that's just kind of what I've expected.
Yeah, it's funny that
I've done
neither of us did.
quarterback drafts, CJ Stroud.
Yeah.
Right. But the one thing I've noticed, when you don't trade, when you just stick and pick with what Seattle has right now, I feel like I've left with one thing I'm missing. No matter what combo I've done, I feel like, I just don't know if I quite got the wide receiver, or, I didn't get that defensive tackle that I'm that excited about, which makes me wonder at 5 or at 20, because everyone talks about 5, but what about at 20 if you can trade back and pick up one more 3rd round pick or one more 2nd round pick, or you trade at 5, like, and we'll talk about this at some other point, but if you trade back and you get a boatload of stuff, now I can go get, how much I love Darnell Washington. I want Darnell Washington on the Seahawks. I'd love to add a receiver, but I also need a
one
center,
of those tight ends.
or
Neither of us.
I also need,
Yeah. neither of us took a tight end, and
that's the other thing is
talking about this class as being one of the best tight end classes in decades. So neither of us got value there.
And we run a tight end. And we run a tight end friendly scheme. And that also goes back to the thing is that the draft is after free agency. There's probably 4 or 5 Seahawks that aren't on the roster right now that we don't know about, which will clear the map, the path up for us. But it's still fun.
These mocks will be a lot more targeted, I think, after free agency starts. We keep hearing that Will Dissly's knee might be, more severe than the team originally let on. And that might be a concern. You can free up, I think, $3 million if you move on from him. So there's lots of possibilities there. It is something that I go back and forth with. And I think moving down from 20 does make a lot of sense value-wise because of what we talked about, that most teams don't have 20 first-round grades or more. And so if there's a guy that they love that falls to that point, they might be willing to give up some value to move up there. And there's some value to be had in getting extra day 2 picks for sure. Well, thanks, man. We kept it to an hour 15. That's not bad. It's not bad for doing 2 mock drafts.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you. It was fun.
And we had to be concise. It's always fun. It's always good to have you on, and we'll definitely do it again. After free agency gets going, things look a little clearer. We'll get on and we'll play around with this some more. Michael Thompson, you can read his stuff at 12th Man Rising. Tell him what else you got going on. Even a new podcast that's not football related, but go ahead and let the folks know what you're doing.
Yeah, no, you can follow me on Twitter at Michael T_05. And pretty much on a weekly basis, I'll have stuff out for Soto at Fansided, 12th Man Rising, College Football Saturday Blitz, and then just started doing a Mariners podcast. No better time to talk about Mariners and maybe the history of the Seattle Mariners than right now. And so you can head on over to at Spotify, Google Podcasts. It is the My Oh My Mariners podcast. And so trying to do a podcast every week. I'm just talking about anything that's happening right now. It's, Dylan Moore signing, international prospects, getting ready for spring training. And, the Mariners are in the hunt for a world championship this year. And we're going to talk about it. And hopefully I can get Dan on the show every once in a while.
I'll give you my thoughts on what I see at spring training when I head down there on the 26th for 9 days. Excited about that. Michael Thompson, thanks for joining us again. It's a good time as always, and we'll have you back on the show soon. A little bit different show, though. I'm going to touch on that in just a moment.
Thanks, Dan.
So, thanks for joining us. Speaking of that, so as most of you know that listen to this podcast, that this podcast ends on the 28th of February. Vox Media has decided basically to eliminate all podcasts from their network, which means any podcast affiliated with the Field Goals website will be no more. And so I've been working on some things on the side of what I'll transition into after the show. Of course, those of you who listen to Dana know that she's got multiple things going on. Brandon, I believe, is going to continue with the Seahawkers podcast, but we're going to talk about that in detail next week. For me personally, I am just going to do my own thing again. And if you listen to either of my 2 podcasts that I did previous to this show, the Dan Cave or the Emerald City Sportscast, you know that I tried to balance things out. I did talk some Mariners, and I tried to keep it a little more Northwest focus. I would even talk some Cougar football and some other things. Being a part of Field Goals and talking about the Seahawks on a nightly basis has really crystallized for me that that's my true passion. I love baseball and I love the Mariners, and I love talking about it, but not with a microphone in my face. It's just not a passion for me the way covering the NFL 365 days a year and the never-ending schedule and the team building that happens in the offseason and the things that go into game prep and game review during the season. It's just something that doing the Field Goals podcast allowed me to realize that that's my passion. And so I'm going to focus just on the Seahawks moving forward. And it didn't take me long to decide on a name because it was right there in front of me. I've been on Twitter for 12 years. My Twitter handle on has been Seahawks forever, and will continue to be. And that will be the name of the new show. And so look for that after the 28th. So as I mentioned, I'm going to spring training. I'll be back on the 6th of March. My first show will be sometime between the 6th of March and the 15th of March because that is the start of the league year. That is when teams can start signing free agents. And actually, I think the 13th is the quote unquote legal tampering period. And so we'll have lots and lots to talk about. Here's the cool thing. Vox Media has been gracious enough to allow us to maintain the feed. What that means in layman's terms is basically the code that identifies that podcast. I get to take it with me and use it for the Seahawks Forever podcast. And so if you subscribe to Field Goals, as soon as I start doing shows under the Seahawks Forever banner, you will get notifications and you will be able to listen to it, and you'll be subscribed on your podcast app, Spotify, Apple, Podbean, whichever, Stitcher, whichever podcast app you use. You'll still be able to follow my podcast. Between now and then, you'll see a little bit of rebranding on my YouTube page. It's already there. But we'll still be doing Field Goals shows up until the 26th. And again, next week, look for a very special episode where Dana and Brandon and I will get together as a group one more time to kind of put a bow on this thing. Thanks for listening. I hope you appreciate this particular episode. Mock drafts always garner a lot of attention and a lot of reaction, a lot of feedback. They always get tons and tons of comments on the Field Goals page. And so I can't wait to see what some of you think about what Michael did, what I did, what we didn't do. Always love the feedback. Everybody has a different, kind of a different way of looking at how to build a team. And you know what? All the teams do too. And that's what makes it fun as well. This thing's going to really get cranked up with the combine in a couple of weeks, and then we'll head into free agency. Thanks for listening. Again, I'm Dan Viens. Follow me at Seahawks Forever on Twitter. We'll talk to you next week.